We are really delighted to have our next guest come up, Pastor Jonathan Schaeffer, senior pastor, lead pastor of Grace Church, and this is one of their campuses, and we do appreciate you all making such a beautiful location here available to us. We originally started talking, and we were talking about doing like a retreat center, Beulah Beach or something, and as the conversation meandered around in planning and so forth, we thought, well, maybe we ought to come in the city and this and that. And then he said, well, this campus here, which I knew of back from the days way back when it was built. And it's like, yeah, that's just kind of like a retreat center right in the city. That sounds great. And so we're really delighted to be able to be here. And somewhere up there is a sun shining down as well, which would make it even more beautiful. And walking trails and everything. So this is a blessing to the community and to the people of God. And thank you again for making this available. So Pastor Jonathan is going to share the next section, and he'll be talking about PrimeTime leadership and the ups and downs and challenges. And, well, I know God put something good in his heart. Let's receive him.
It's always dangerous to be the one speaking after dinner, right? You've had one of those nothing bundt cakes and some salmon going through your veins, but really glad to have you. Peter, thank you for your talk and to say, how do we have influence without controlling and persuading without coercion, and especially having grown up the youngest in the family, saying you had to learn that, but then to say, how can we see that in the scriptures and in our own lives? I think one of the benefits of a time like this is just table talk as well, isn't it? That you get to meet people and say, we've been making connections at our table here. We have people from all over the place, and I hope that's been the case at your table as well. And I'm really glad to hear from one of my heroes a little bit later in the evening, John Beckett, who at the age of, I think, 59 or whatever he is, continues to serve with faithfulness and impact. And when you see someone who continues to bear fruit as they continue on the journey, you stop and you listen and you glean and you pay attention. And so really grateful for men and women like John, whose impact just continues to grow with age. As Tom said, this is our Olmsted Falls campus, and I want to pay tribute to the Worldview congregation that met here years ago. And Kenny and Debbie Roberts. Debbie was killed in a car accident. I was friends with them. And then years later, about 8 years ago, we took possession of this campus. So we have a campus here, Middlebrook Heights, but what I'm excited about right now today is we have another campus that most of you will not be attending because it's Lorraine Correctional. And so, but if you find yourself there, we will love to have you in a Bible study, but I hope that doesn't happen to you. And but just yesterday, it's been amazing the favor that God has given in the last year, but I got a text last night, and I wrote it down here. Someone wrote, and we have a few volunteers here who are on our elder team who are part of that, probably 35 people who are serving at Lorraine Correctional. Last night, here's a text said, today was an amazing day, 7 baptisms, 127 people at our worship services. There are 2 that happen every Monday. Reconciliation that took place. We had an inmate preach because the power went out. Heard a presentation for an event in September where the men will ask their kids for forgiveness, then wash their children's feet and put a new pair of sneakers on them to reconcile. And the guys were in tears yesterday just hearing about that. Led a guy to Jesus this afternoon. Had the deputy warden thank our entire team for helping be part of changing the culture at Lorraine Correctional. And so just to see God at work. So I love serving as part of the church family of Grace. This spring marked 25 years being on staff at Grace, and I'm just grateful for what God is doing through so many churches across Northeast Ohio, and seeing the outreach and the partnership, as Tom said earlier, that can take place. But more than the 25 years I've had at Grace, I'm really thrilled that this Sunday marks 35 years of being married to my best friend, and that's my wife, Mary. Would you stand up 1 second here? So we have 5 children and 2 children-in-law, 1 grandson and a little granddaughter on the way. We're not a military family. Like, I'm one of 9 children. None of us was in the military. My parents were in the military, but we have 3 of our kids who went to military academy. I was talking to Kevin a little bit ago. Kevin went to West Point. And so you know that to get in, you need a congressional nomination. And so we have 3 of our kids who've done that, Coast Guard, Air Force. We have a son at the Air Force Academy right now, and a daughter went to West Point. And so sitting in front of this interview for this congressional nomination, there's a panel of people, and and they asked her the question. They said, in your estimation, who's the greatest leader that you admire and would like to emulate? So here you are, an 18-year-old, and someone asks you that question in an environment that, and you know that your nomination this is one of the big questions. What would you say? She responded, she said without hesitation, she said, well, I would say that Jesus is the greatest leader that I would want to emulate, and she got the nomination. I'm not saying it was for that reason, but it didn't make them say no. But when you think about that, what is it that makes Jesus such an effective leader? That would allow him to impact generations, to come. And as Peter said earlier, you might not be like right now, like an active follower of Jesus, might not be, but I'd like us just to consider for a little bit how somebody who, when you think about it, who had so few resources, relatively few years, could have an impact on cultures globally to the extent that now maybe a third of the world's population in some sense would say, I follow that person. I follow that person. What is it about? I want to talk just for this time I have, and I make sure I have my phone here, that I don't go over time. But I'd like to talk about a level 5 kind of leadership. If you've read John Maxwell, they talk about, the different levels of leadership, that we don't simply want to lead out of our position or out of our title, but we want to lead out of something that people would say, I would follow you even if you didn't have a position or a title, as my supervisor or whatever the case may be. That's the kind of leader we want to be, right? Someone who has an influence that extends beyond a certain segment of time of the title we have, and that can leave a legacy that says, I want people to be able to look back. We were talking at our table, and we said, who's the leader that had really significant influence in your life? And it was interesting to hear people go around, and some of the stories that were told were maybe one incident that was not even an intentional time, but that we said, wow, that one example set the course for or helped to shape someone at our table's leadership, philosophy. And I'm convinced that when we lead like Jesus does, that we lead for the long haul, that we can have a leadership kind of run that allows us to endure, and really, it's a kind of leadership that I believe is sorely lacking today in a world that often is screaming at each other and feels like whoever's the loudest voice or the most power wins. So I want us to reflect on leadership that inspires, that doesn't just call people to follow because of position and title, leadership that leaves a positive, lasting impression on others. And so in the few minutes I have, I'd like us to look, what was it about Jesus, his example? Secondly, why is this kind of leadership so countercultural but effective? Third, an example of this kind of leadership, and then a place to start in our own lives. So again, even if you're not a follower of Jesus, I want you to just stick with me here, because I think we're drawn to people in history that we say, what was it about them that they had such impact? I want you to listen to 2 words that Jesus says about himself that really that describe who he is as a person, and they're taken from Matthew chapter 11. And I'll just read this couple of verses. And here's what Jesus says. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." That's a great invitation, isn't it? Still available today. If you're weary and burdened, I will give you rest. "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." It's the only time in all four Gospels that Jesus describes himself with character traits. The only time. And he uses two words. He says, "I am" what? "Gentle and humble in heart." Humble and gentle. When you think, what kind of leader is Jesus? And when I ask that question, I'm going to ask it a few times here because I want to sort of drill this down. Would you just say those two words, humble and gentle? So let me just ask you, what kind of leader is Jesus? Humble and gentle. Humble and gentle. When you're humble, you're self-aware. You're willing to acknowledge your faults. You're able to laugh at yourself. It's not all about you. You aim to help other people reach their potential and not just use people to reach your own. Jesus called out leaders in the marketplace, in fact, and he said, there are people who love to sort of exert their authority over others, and they sort of lord it over them. He says, don't be that kind of person. He wasn't just talking to pastors. He was talking to anybody. He says, I don't want you to be that kind of person who just sort of like walks with the swagger and has that. Humble leaders don't do that. He was humble. He also said, I'm gentle in heart. When you're gentle, you treat people with dignity as treasures, people who carry within them the image of God himself. It's how you treat the server at the restaurant, or the custodial person on night shift, or the 4-year-old child who lives next door, or the elderly person sitting in a wheelchair. Do I treat them with great value? A gentle person treats everyone with a sense of value. Just to be clear, I think sometimes we think of gentleness and we think of a person who's like there's an absence of strength. An absence of strength is just weakness, right? But gentleness is the ability to take your strength, your position, your authority, and to put guardrails on it where you use it in a way that's for the good of others and not something that just sort of steamrolls the people around you. Back in the first century, when Jesus would have used this term, the word gentle was another word for that was the word meek. Some translations will use the word meek. I'm meek and humble. And the picture that often people would think of in that day was you could describe a mighty horse like a stallion, this powerful, majestic stallion. Think of this as being meek. You go, how is it possible? Because it was a horse that had tremendous strength and power, but that was under control. That didn't just, let the strength just run wild and damage people around and trample them, but instead had strength that knew when to use it and when not to. To be gentle in no way implies weakness or lack of ability. Instead, it's strength under control. So, in other words, to be a gentle leader means you can still have difficult conversations, right? Any leader needs to have those. But when you have the conversation that's difficult, that you do so for the good of the other person, where when they leave the conversation, they might say, that sort of hurt, but they didn't harm me. I love how I think it's Henry Cloud talks about that. It's sort of like when you go to the dentist. The dentist, if they're doing their job, she might cause some hurt, but if she causes harm, you'd go, that's never the intent, right? Hurt can help a person become stronger and more healthy. Harm never does. And I guess unless you're the dentist, like, is it Little Shop of Horrors, Steve Martin's character? Maybe some of you. That shows I'm a legacy leader, whatever you call it, right? But someone who's sadistic, we're not talking about that. But when we talk about someone who's gentle, we're saying you can be strong, you can be direct, but you always do it for the good of others. What kind of leader was Jesus? He was humble and gentle. Let me try that one more time. What kind of leader was Jesus? And I really should say, what kind of leader is Jesus? In my own sphere of church leadership, sadly, if we're just transparent, the church has caused a lot of damage as an institution to people. So it's very painful for me to hear a young person talk about church hurt. You might go, it's not just young people. Maybe you've experienced that yourself. You say, I was in a church, whatever background, and that was your experience. On behalf of, I just apologize. I can't imagine what that does to the heart of God, that a place that's supposed to be a place of security and growth and nurture and development becomes a place where there's anger and abusiveness and abrasiveness. And I'm sure you've seen that. Plenty of examples through history, but it's painful to see it continue today. And I don't need to name names. You've probably seen podcasts or read in the news about various people, and you say, wow, that person they were an author, they were some kind of on a speaking circuit, and they were a very gifted communicator, gifted leader. Some of the leadership books I've read, and now they went off the rails, and often it was because they were not gentle, humble leaders. It didn't sustain them for the long haul. But there are exceptions, and there's many. But I want to just talk for a moment. I said I wanted to talk about what was it about Jesus? What kind of leader is Jesus? Yeah, you can say it either way, gentle and humble, humble and gentle. It's countercultural. It's not even in Jesus' day. People, we want to lord it over. We think that we can win by forcing people. But an example in my own life, a leader who exemplified these character traits, and one that I've really looked up to, who actually passed away about a month ago, Tim Keller. Was accomplished in many ways. He was the founding pastor of a church called Redeemer Presbyterian in New York City. He authored over 20 books, starting with this first one at age 58. He died at the age of 72. And some of you have read The Reason for God, sort of a modern day like C.S. Lewis, or The Meaning of Marriage, or Where is God in Pain and Suffering, or Counterfeit Gods, or other such books. And his ministry attracted people from Hollywood and corporate boardrooms and city officials, and I found out recently at his funeral, leaders people in the corner offices at Wall Street Journal and New York Times. Tim Keller was a guy, but he was also known to be humble and gentle. He didn't like taking selfies with people and say, look which celebrity I was with. We had the rapper artist Lecrae at our church several weeks ago, and I read in an interview, Lecrae said, there are three people that, in his words, he said, I've been starstruck by: Michael Jordan, Jay-Z, and Tim Keller. All in the same sentence. You wouldn't think about putting those guys in the same sentence, right? How did Tim Keller inspire that kind of respect from so many people from different backgrounds? If you heard him speak, or you watched a podcast or had a conversation with him, you knew that Tim reflected the character of Jesus in leadership. What kind of leader is Jesus? Humble and gentle, yeah. That was Tim Keller. And one person who was with him quite a bit wrote this after Tim died from pancreatic cancer last month. He said, over the past several years, Tim and I were often in conversation with people who are not believers, some curious and ironic about faith, others dismissive and hostile. In every one of those interactions, I never once saw Tim humiliate someone with arguments, even though he could have easily done so. At the end of one such conversation, there was no question that Tim understood the argument being made and had responded with devastating clarity. But we also all knew that his talk wouldn't end up as a YouTube video titled, "Watch Tim Keller Own the Atheist." He really loved people and engaged them without passive retreat or intellectual intimidation. Such a great reflection of the chief shepherd. And Tim Keller finished well. I want to finish like that. I'm 58 years old. I don't know, I sort of tell Mary if I ran track years, I know it doesn't look like it, but I ran track years and years ago, but I sort of feel like I'm on the final lap at least of being employed. Maybe I hope I can continue to have influence, but I don't know how long I have on this earth. But I thought I want to finish well. What does that look like? I really think so much comes back to these character traits. To lead like Jesus. To have humility and gentleness, that people say it's not about her, it's not about him, it's about the people around them that they're lifting up. It's about the mission that they've been called to together, and they treat everybody with dignity. I think we've all been in groups where you sort of are in a conversation with someone, the person all of a sudden looks over your shoulder and they see someone that they deem to be like a little more important, and they quickly just sort of like drift away, right? You've been there. And you think, Lord, I don't want to be like that. I want to be humble and gentle. So where do we start if we want to lead like that? I want to talk about just one element of living this style of leadership. Would you agree that whatever kind of leadership style we're known for, it's often exemplified through the words that we speak? If a person is arrogant and abrasive and angry, we often know it how? By the kind of words that come out of their mouth, right? The tone with which they speak to people, especially maybe under pressure in a room. If we're gentle and humble, again, that's most often going to be seen in our words and how we say them. So a person might say, well, how do I watch my words? Like, I want to make sure that I avoid saying the things that are going to be arrogant and abrasive, and I want to make sure I say words that are gentle and humble. But Jesus goes deeper than that. He says, I'm gentle and humble in heart, right? There's something about the core of who I am. So we try to get our words right, but Jesus says this in another passage in Luke chapter 6. He says, a good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart. And an evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. What you say flows from what is in your heart. That's the word from Jesus. Here's what he's saying. Trevor Wax puts it this way. He says, our focus should be not so much on what we say as on what we store up. Let me say it one more time. Our focus shouldn't be so much on just the words that we say, but on the treasure that we store up. In other words, when we store up in our heart, let me just give a few examples. If I store up bitterness, my words will ooze with resentment when somebody crosses me. We're talking beyond workplace. We can talk about a marriage or another relationship. You go to your July 4th reunion. If we store pride, our speech will drip with sarcasm and condescension. If we store up envy, we'll find ourselves giving voice to chipping away at somebody else's character or credibility. Their name comes up and we go, oh, well, if you knew about it, because of envy. What do we store up in our heart? But we can also go a different direction. If we store up humility, we'll acknowledge when we've messed up. We'll confess when we fail. When we store up grace, we'll return good for evil. When we store up conviction, we can speak with courage when everybody else compromises. And when we store up gratitude, we can speak with humility and gentleness when others fall prey to anger. What you fill the storeroom of your heart with is what will come out. So the question really isn't so much what should we say, but what should we store up? What are we putting in the storeroom of our heart? What kind of leader is Jesus? Humble and gentle. What kind of leaders do we want to be? Oh, may it be. May it be that even if we say, I'm not sure how well that works in the workplace. One of the questions I gave to Dan earlier is, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk through this, but when you think back to leaders who exemplify this, I think many of us would say, that leader had a huge impact in my life. They had a humility that I knew they cared about me as a person. They saw me for who I was. They were, when I was a jerk, they were gentle. If you want to be gentle and humble in heart, guard your heart, not just your lips. Guard your heart, not just your lips. Your leadership impact will grow. You'll help to shape the people you'll lead. And you'll reflect the heart of the one who's had such an impact in the world over the centuries. I'm glad you're here today. I'm glad you're investing this time. You could have been in a lot of other places on a beautiful summer day. Well, sort of beautiful. But may it be that these character traits, what kind of leader is Jesus? Humble and gentle. I hope you're going to go to bed tonight going, I can't believe it just keeps on going through my head. Humble and gentle. May it be us that we lead in that kind of way, and that over the long haul, that people look back and say, I loved following you as a leader. That 18 months, that 18 years, those are the best years I had as a worker, as whatever kind of sphere of work you do, may it be. That's my prayer for me, my prayer for you. Thanks.
Let's give another round of applause. Wow. I guess say it again, right? Humble and gentle. Thank you very much. It was inspiring. Question: what are some of the reasons you think humility and gentleness increase a leader's influence?
I think the younger generation today especially has radar up where they can smoke out people who are fake. Maybe it's not just young people, but I think young people, like millennials especially, they just go, that person's like a fraud. When there's humility and gentleness, I think they see the reality of that person knows who they are. There's a self-awareness, and there's a respect that begins to grow takes place. So I think the genuineness helps people to see a leader. They go, I'm willing to follow that person.
Another question while you're thinking of a question for Jonathan. Jonathan said that these character traits start with a healthy heart. What happens if we seek to merely practice better leadership skills without giving attention to the health of our soul?
Personally, what I've experienced is that I need the strength of the Spirit of Jesus living within me to help shape my heart and shape my words. And there are times that as leaders we need to be directive, right? When you're in a crisis, and I had a guy who is a leader in our church, and when we were going through stuff with COVID, and he said, there are times you need to be directive. He says, when we're in a crisis, you don't say, hey, are you willing to do? And so there's a directiveness that needs to take place at times. You say, you just need to trust me. This is what we're going to do, and this is how we're doing it. And I realize in those kind of times, I need someone's strength beyond my own to be humble and gentle, and to have my words be reflective of the one who I claim to serve. So I think that's one, and also giving attention to the heart and not just our words. If my wife, I'm just going to put in my relationship with Mary, I told her last night, I said, our relationship gets better as the years go by, 35 years, and you're a better friend, but if Mary senses that I'm just saying words that I think will somehow make her feel good or whatever, but don't really come from my heart, she's going to sense that. It goes back to the first question, and I think there needs to be a sense, does she genuinely sense his heart is for me? And even when I sometimes get her wrong, she might go, the words didn't come out right, but I know your heart. Can you trust someone's heart even when they don't always get it right in the heat of the moment?
We'd like to take some questions from the floor. Is there anyone?
It's always that awkward silence for a moment until someone puts up their hand. Thank you.
Pastor Schaeffer, great words. In an age where media glorifies strong, almost abrasive and angry leadership, and we have a younger generation of leaders that are coming up, viewing that as being successful, top of mind, how do you instill a gentle, humble heart, even within the church or ministry leadership, that view that as the standard?
Wow. That is a great question. Because in the church, I've had people be critical of me saying, you need to be like this. They'll send me YouTube clips. You need to be like this pastor or this one. And they're screaming at people at their phone. And you've probably seen the same clips, right? I think that's a short-lived influence. And there might be people who wander away. And I'm not just saying in the church world, but in business or wherever. You might say, people follow me when I scream at them or when I yell or when I'm arrogant you might not say you're that, but people, if you ask them, do I ever come across as abrasive or arrogant or, to say, God, would you search my heart? But to say, I am serving an audience of one. And whether you're a corporate leader, political, you're in sports or media or wherever it may be, if you can say, ultimately, who am I serving? If you're a follower of Jesus, in Colossians 3, it says, ultimately, whatever you do, you're doing for the Lord, right? Amen. So that could be if a person's a stay-at-home parent or if they're a teacher, an engineer, they lead a team of 1,000 people. Ultimately, they don't report to a board of directors. They report. I have some of my elders here. We have a great elder team at Grace Church. They know that they are under the chief shepherd, and I am amenable to our elder team, and then ultimately to Jesus. And so even if people get frustrated with me, like you need to be more of this or more of that, I say that's not the way of Jesus. Jesus could have direct conversations, no question. But he was not an angry, abrasive leader. Yeah. Good question.
Any other questions from the floor? I have one. And I really appreciate you bringing up Tim Keller, because I was like, please let nothing bad come in the news, because he's such a great example. How do you cultivate a community where you have humble and gentle leaders? What's that look like, the environment? What practical way would you say that?
I remember an author, Lyle Schaller, said that when you come into an organization, you may be frustrated after 1 year because you'll have less influence in 1 year than you hoped for. But if you can stick it out for 5 years, you will have helped to shape the culture that you lead. And especially the larger an organization. And so I think that sense of patience to say people will begin to catch, like, wow, when she was under pressure or when he faced that was someone just made. I remember I had a guy, I was speaking one Sunday morning at Grace, and I'm speaking about a topic, forgiveness, and this guy yells out, F you. But he didn't just say F. And it was the whole, I paused and he said it right then. How I respond in that moment, I was discipling our entire church family, right? To be able to say, wow, there's a person here who has obviously had deep wounds, and my heart aches for you. I'd love to talk to you after the service, but God can take whatever pain and redeem that, but not to respond like, ushers, come and take that man out, right? How you respond in moments of either a board meeting or a one-on-one conversation or the server at the restaurant overhears your conversation, or whatever. Every situation, people are watching and they're gleaning, from how you lead. So I would say be patient over the long haul. If you're newer in your organization, stick it out, and you'll reap the benefits of that kind of investment over time.
Thank you, Pastor Schaeffer.
Yeah.
What do you say about the attitude Jesus took when he went to the temple and he found people selling and he overthrew even the table?
Yeah.
What can you say about that? That
Right.
was, he was humble or gentle, or
Yeah.
what happened at that time?
I would still say that Jesus was gentle and humble in heart. Yeah. He's unchanging, right? So even in that moment, there was strength under control. There was not a sense in which Jesus just like, you know what, I've had it. And just, he knew what he was doing. He actually put the whip together and had time to think through what he was going to accomplish in that moment. So it was a very strategic operation. I think for leaders today, we don't have the perspective that Jesus had, in the sense of he is divine and I am not. So before I would go in and start turning tables over in culture or in church, I better be really, really careful. And I think that there's probably a little bit too much of people think they can be table turning in society and cursing the darkness. And what the world longs to see are people who reflect. What does it say are the evidence of the Spirit of God within us? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. There it is again, gentleness and self-control. Those are the character traits that when people see, they're going to go, I see Jesus in you. And so there are times but Jesus was most often with the religious people is where he saved his most direct words, not the world, right? And so if we can do the same, and in church, because I have people say, you need to rail against the culture. And I said, no, we're going after purity and holiness among us. And we'll love the culture. That's going to be our primary objective here. And I think that's the way of Jesus. So there can be direct conversations, and Jesus has some difficult conversations, but I think on balance, when we look at how he interacted mostly with people one-on-one, we'd say it's especially evident there, the way he held up the dignity of people. But he did challenge when it was time to do so. We had a question right here, yeah.
Yeah, Jonathan, agreed. Just think. No, I'll just talk.
If you hold it up higher, the antenna's at the bottom, so if you hold it up here, you'll do better.
All right, thank you. We as leaders, agreed, want to be humble and gentle, but we do fail. How do we respond to those we're leading in the right way? I know you mentioned, recognition of that, but any further thoughts you could provide?
You're saying when we fail?
Yeah, when we're abrasive or
That's
pride.
good. I think the staff that I lead at Grace, we have a few campuses, so there are times that owning up to what we've done and saying I need to just acknowledge I failed in that moment. I'm one of 9 children. My mom and dad were amazing people. They're in heaven today. My dad was a great leader, and my mom was too in her own way. But my dad, some of the most influential moments are when my dad would come to us kids and say, I need to ask your forgiveness. I spoke out of anger. And it was very hard. I remember watching him thinking, this is really painful for Dad to do. You know what happened to my respect level? Wow, it just went up, right? It was humility again. And so when we mess up, to be willing to go back, and rather than saying, oh, they'll get over it, no, to say, the way I spoke to you, I think was disrespectful, or in the heat of the moment, I think I didn't handle that correctly. I didn't listen well before I spoke, whatever it may be. I'm really sorry, or would you forgive me? And to move on. And I think that because we all mess up. I mess up. I had to make that right with my wife not too long ago, and but I think it helps any relationship to grow stronger. But thank you for acknowledging that. Yeah.
In the audience, in today's cancel culture, with people living off the rails and hating what we believe and live for, how do you respond to their vehement responses to us?
This is going to get harder for anybody who holds on to the scriptures as their guide for living, because more and more we're out of sync with culture. And so to be able to say I might be seen as a bigot or as or worse, but who shapes my identity? And if the one who shapes my identity approves of me, then I'm good. And so I think we will face more ridicule, perhaps some kind of persecution. But that was what led in the early church to the advance of the church was the world watching how they responded under duress, and also helped to just disperse them to become a people that had influence far and wide. So will we be canceled? Will I be canceled? I've already been canceled, and I'm sure some of you have been too. I think I just want to make sure when I'm canceled, it's not because Peter says in 1 Peter, he says, if you suffer, make sure it's for doing good and not because you sort of had it coming to you. And sometimes we have it coming to us because we've just said things in a really dumb way. But if we can say, I think I said that with integrity and with grace, and I still get hammered, I'm willing to live with that.
Wow. Let's thank Jonathan again. Tom,